Chapter 13 is another view of Hester. And this is another great example of how Hawthorne really does know how to sort of really reveal the inner workings of these characters. It says here that in her late singular interview with Mr. Dimmesdale, Hester Prynne was shocked at the condition of his health. You know, she's very upset by how sick he's gotten. His moral force was abased into more than childish weakness. It groveled helpless on the ground. So it's personifying his moral force is groveling and helpless. So he's just completely broken. Knowing what this poor fallen man had once been, because remember, they were lovers many, many years ago, her whole soul was moved by the shuddering terror with which he had appealed to her, the outcast woman, for support against his instinctively discovered enemy. So she's shaken here by how afraid Dimmesdale was of Chillingworth. And she wishes that she could help him, because obviously she knows that Roger Chillingworth wants revenge. And of course, now we know that Roger Chillingworth recognizes that Dimmesdale is the father. Hester saw, or seemed to see, that there lay a responsibility upon her in reference to the clergyman, which she owed to no other. So she feels responsible for his illnesses, that his suffering. She feels like she should be helping him, which is true. I think that's a reasonable thought. Here was the iron link of mutual crime, which neither he nor she could break. Like all other ties, it brought along with it its obligations. So, you know, she's been doing pretty well. And I think this is something else to consider as an overall theme. When you hide a sin compared to if you show it and acknowledge it, you know, what does that do to your mental health, to your physical health? Hawthorne seems to be saying here, obviously, that being open about your mistakes and, you know, sort of taking the punishment is better for yourself in the long run. At this point, this could be a quiz question. I think it's also important just to mark the time here. Pearl is now 7 years old. And her mother, with the scarlet letter on her breast, glittering in its fantastic embroidery, had long been a familiar object to the townspeople. I think this is interesting how the way she is viewed is changing. Over time, people are liking her better. It says here that in general, people had sort of softened to her. And I think obviously she's been contributing to their society. She's a seamstress. She's sitting by the bed of people who are dying so that she can make their gowns. She's walking through the streets and she's, you know, sort of accepting their hostility. In this matter of Hester Prynne, there was neither irritation nor irksomeness. She never battled with the public, but submitted uncomplainingly to its worst usage. So because she's been sort of enduring her sin and the mark upon her, people are starting to respect her. It says here it was perceived, too, that while Hester never put forward even the humblest title to share in the world's privileges, further than to breathe the common air and earn daily bread for little Pearl, she was quick to acknowledge her sisterhood with the race of man whenever benefits were to be conferred. Now, I know that's pretty sophisticated and kind of old-fashioned language, but what we're going to get here in this description is that she's generous with people. She especially reaches out to people who are poor or who are suffering. She came not as a guest, but as a rightful inmate into the household that was darkened by trouble. So there's a lot of descriptions here about she brings food to the poor. Even though they kind of like reject her food initially, they take it because they need it. And so she just continues to give back to society. And obviously people have recognized that. It says here that such helpfulness was found in her, so much power to do and power to sympathize, that many people refused to interpret the scarlet A by its original signification. They said that it meant able. So strong was Hester Prynne with a woman's strength. So her good deeds are so noticeable, and she is so steady and, you know, pleasant and not bothering anybody, that people start to see her now as someone who is a good force in their society, that she's capable and that she's good. So literally her sin has sort of transformed. And I think this is another good example of like what happens to sin if you atone for it. In fact, I even wrote the word atonement over here. That's another word that starts with the letter A. They could be connected to the Scarlet Letter. It says here, it was only the darkened house that could contain her. When sunshine came again, she was not there. Her shadow had faded across the threshold. The helpful inmate had departed without one backward glance to gather up the meed of gratitude, if any were in the hearts of those whom she had served so zealously. So what this means is that she's not socializing with people in town. She's going, delivering her goods when she does, sewing for them. When she goes to help somebody, she goes and helps them and then she leaves. She's not looking for people to thank her. She's not looking to be friends with those people. She's just giving back, and she does not want to do any more than that. If anyone were to accost her, like to try and talk to her on the street, she laid her finger on the Scarlet Letter and passed on. This might be pride, but it was so like humility that it produced all the softening influence of the latter quality on the public mind. So it's like by touching her Scarlet Letter, she's saying, I'm a sinner. I shouldn't be talking to you. And she kind of keeps herself in her place during those times a day when somebody might want to reach out to her and be friends. And she's not going to do that. This is also interesting here too, that even these rulers, the governors and other leaders of the church who were so quick to condemn her, it's taking them longer to acknowledge that she has good qualities, but eventually they do. Day by day, their sour and rigid wrinkles were relaxing, and they quietly are forgiving her. So I think that's also important, because these are the people who seem to have like this moral superiority and who were so quick to make her wear the Scarlet Letter. To look upon the Scarlet Letter as the token, not of that one sin for what she had borne so long, but of her many good deeds since. So this idea connects to this over here, that the Scarlet Letter now has come to symbolize the good things she has done, how able and strong she is. And this is an example of what people might say. Do you see that woman with the embroidered badge? So it's no longer like a shameful thing. A badge sounds like sort of like a medal. It is our Hester, the town's own Hester, who is so kind to the poor, so helpful to the sick, so comfortable to the afflicted. Then it is true, the propensity of human nature to tell the very worst of itself, when embodied in the person of another, would constrain them to whisper the black scandal of bygone years. So like they hardly even talk about the darkness of the original reason that she wore that Scarlet Letter. It was nonetheless a fact, however, that in the eyes of the very men who spoke thus, the Scarlet Letter had the effect of the cross on a nun's bosom. So it's even going beyond ableness and good deeds to something holy like a cross, like she's dedicated to God. And this is why I wrote the word atonement. All of her good actions are atoning for her sin, and so the Scarlet Letter has taken on a new meaning. The effect of the symbol, or rather of the position and respect to society that was indicated by it on the mind of Hester Prynne herself, was powerful and peculiar. All the light and graceful foliage of her character had been withered up by this red-hot brand and had long ago fallen away, leaving a bare and harsh outline which might have been repulsive had she possessed friends or companions to be repelled by it. So she's no longer attractive. And we get that here. Even the attractiveness of her person had undergone a similar change. It might be partly owing to the studied austerity of her dress. It was a sad transformation. Her rich and luxuriant hair had either been cut off or was hidden by a cap. So the way she presents herself and the way she actually physically looks is burdened. She does not look lively, healthy, young anymore. She looks weathered, is how I would probably describe her, by her life. And I wrote here, she has been hardened. So her appearance, but also just her demeanor has been hardened by her life. Some attribute had departed from her, the permanence of which had been essential to keep her a woman. So she's lost some of her femininity. If she survived, the tenderness will either be crushed out of her, is one idea, and the outer semblance is the same, crushed so deeply into her heart that it can never show itself more. So it's like fate has taken away her femininity, and, she will continue to live, but her tenderness is gone, is what this is saying. So all of this, I think the best summary here is that she has been hardened by life, which is sort of an overall expression that describes all of that. There's another change that has come about because of her, and that is that she has become a thinker. Much of the marble coldness of Hester's impression was to be attributed to the circumstances that her life had turned, in a great measure, from passion and feeling to thought. So remember, she became an unwed mother out of passion, clearly. Now she's becoming more of a thoughtful person. She is alone in the world. And so because she has so much time, she's starting to think. Even had she not scorned to consider it desirable, she cast away the fragment of a broken chain. The world's law was no law for her mind. It was an age in which the human intellect, newly emancipated, had taken a more active and a wider range than for many centuries before. So this is referring here to what was happening actually during this time period, which is the beginning of the Enlightenment movement. People were starting to become more rational in their thinking, to question authority. This was happening first in England, but it was certainly coming to the colonies. And so she's no longer chained to these Puritan expectations because she sort of lives outside of their community. And so she's starting to think like many Enlightenment thinkers, questioning, some of these laws in society, which of course Hawthorne himself is also doing through this book. Men of the sword had overthrown nobles and kings. This is what was happening in history. Men bolder than these had overthrown and rearranged the whole system of ancient prejudice, wherewith was linked such much of ancient principle. Hester imbibed this spirit. She assumed a freedom of speculation, so she's questioning society. Then common enough on the other side of the Atlantic in Europe, but which our forefathers, had they known it, would have held to be a deadlier crime than what was stigmatized by the Scarlet Letter. So the colonists, because they're not in Europe, are not aware of how quickly these Enlightenment thoughts are growing. And of course, they became, when they finally did come to America, they had the potential to sort of break apart the moral, ties that kept these Puritan societies together. So she is quietly thinking very much like an Enlightenment thinker, and nobody in town knows it. And she's no danger to them because she's so isolated. In her lonesome cottage by the seashore, thoughts visited her such as dared to enter no other dwelling in New England. Shadowy guests that would have been as perilous as demons to their entertainer could they have been so much as knocking at her door. So again, personifying these thoughts of rationalist ideas and things like that. It is remarkable that persons who speculate the most boldly often conform with the most perfect quietude to the external regulations of society. The thought suffices them without investing itself in the flesh and blood of action. So I just made a note that this was interesting. I don't think this is a universal truth. I think we can think of many examples of people who speculate very boldly about society and do take action, but her particular situation is because she's so marginalized, she really has no business taking action, and she's actually free to think anything she wants because no one would ever imagine that she could be a threat. It says here that if she had not been burdened by the Scarlet Letter, she could have become a rebel. She might have come down through history like Anne Hutchinson, who basically, was sent away from the Puritan church because she had thoughts about individual relationships with God. She might have done all these things. She could have been a prophetess. She might have done something to undermine the foundations of the Puritan establishment. All these things she could have done if she had not been burdened with a child. Because she has this child, the germ and blossom of womanhood to be cherished and developed amid a host of difficulties, she has her hands full. She's not going to be stirring up trouble in society, but that doesn't mean she can't think about it, and she does think about it. She probably thinks about it too, and this is just me on my own thinking here, as a way to separate herself from her motherly role, because all she is really in her day-to-day life is a mother and a somewhat peripheral contributor to their society. And being a mother to Pearl is a big challenge. She does say here the child's own nature had something wrong in it. And she sometimes wondered whether it were for good or evil that the poor little creature had been born at all. She's wondering whether she should have even had this child because she's so difficult. Indeed, the same question often rose in her mind with reference to the whole race of womanhood. So she's a feminist. She's starting to think about how women are trapped in just a basic existence and that they accept it. And she thinks about, is it enough just to be home, taking care of a child and basically doing the bidding of your husband? She's starting to realize, she's not shackled by those expectations. She doesn't have to take care of a man, and that she sees all these women so willing to do it. And so that also makes her wonder. This whole section here talks about the fact that women are trapped, that there's no way that a woman can actually change unless men change first, because it's the men who are holding them back. It says here, then the very nature of the opposite sex is to be essentially modified before a woman can be allowed to assume what seems a fair and suitable position. Men have to give her room at the table. Finally, all other difficulties being obviated, woman cannot take advantage of these preliminary reforms until she herself shall have undergone a still mightier change, in which perhaps the ethereal essence wherein she has her truest life will be found to have evaporated. A woman never overcomes these problems by any exercise of thought. They are not to be solved or only in one way. If her heart chance to come uppermost, they vanish. So she's thinking women need to then, if they're given a seat at the table, they need to have the ability to step up and do something with it. And that, women, their emotions might hold them back. Their ties to their children, their other duties might make it conflicting for them to step up and take more of a role in society. So she's recognizing, and keep in mind, Hawthorne is recognizing too, how complicated this is for women and how hard it is going to be for society to change. And then when you think about, a lifetime and maybe never seeing those changes, you wonder whether, life is worth living, which is kind of where she gets to at some point. Every now and then, Hester wonders, is it better for Pearl to die? Is it better for her to die? Maybe things just are never going to get any better in this society. So these are some of the dark thoughts that she has sometimes when she's by herself. Now, however, her interview with the Reverend Dimmesdale on the night of his vigil had given her a new theme of reflection. So she has something new to think about instead of all these dark, fatalistic ideas about, the role of women. She sees an apparently worthy sort of bit of work that she should be doing. She finds meaning in trying to help him. She realizes that, she and he made this child. He's the father of her daughter. They have a relationship. They bear a burden together. She is doing better because she's able to openly express it. He is not, and perhaps she should reach out and help him, which is a wonderful idea. Her only justification lay in the fact that she had been able to discern no method of rescuing him from a blacker ruin than had overwhelmed herself by acquiescing in Roger Chillingworth's scheme of disguise. So she, up until this moment, never really knew how to help him. All she figured she could do was to make sure that Chillingworth didn't find out who he was, and that Dimmesdale didn't find out who Chillingworth was, like just by keeping the husband sort of a secret, obviously making sure Chillingworth didn't know that Dimmesdale was the father. She's thinking that that was enough. But under the impulse, she had made her choice and had chosen, as it now appeared, the more wretched alternative of the two. She determined to redeem her error as far as it might yet be possible. Like, she should have done more. Strengthened by years of hard and solemn trials, she felt herself no longer so inadequate to cope with Roger Chillingworth as on that night. Because, initially she promised never to say who Roger Chillingworth was. She felt sort of trapped by this situation. Now she's thinking maybe she should have been a little more thoughtful in that decision. The old man, on the other hand, had brought himself nearer to her level, or perhaps below it, by the revenge which she had stooped for. This is sort of ironic. So in the meantime, Roger Chillingworth has become a much more dangerous person, certainly to the well-being of Dimmesdale. So Hester Prynne resolves to meet her former husband. She decides she's going to talk to Roger Chillingworth. This will be interesting. And do what might be in her power to rescue the victim on whom he had so evidently set his gripe. So she's hoping to talk to Chillingworth and convince him to leave Dimmesdale alone. So one afternoon, walking with Pearl in a retired part of the peninsula, she saw Roger Chillingworth with a basket on one arm and a staff in the other hand, stooping along the ground in quest of roots and herbs to concoct his medicine. So she has her opportunity to talk to him.